Hello and welcome to Beyond the Noise, the podcast series from PRWeek. I'm John Harrington, the editor of PRWeek UK. And before we start, I wanted to quickly mention some important PRWeek events and awards coming up. The deadline to enter the Brand Film Awards, which celebrates the best in brand storytelling on film, is very soon, Thursday 6th of February. PRWeek's Corporate Affairs Awards is also still open for entries. The deadline there is 13th of February, so get your entries in for both. Meanwhile, PRWeek's annual Crisis Communications Summit returns to London on the 12th of February. Hear from top names including Samsung UK, Every and Royal Mail. Space are limited, so book your place today. Right, this week I make no apologies for returning to the topic of AI. This isn't a rerun of the episode we heard from Omnicom PR Group's Erin Lanuti about the massive impact of DeepSeek's entry to the market and what it means for PR. Do check out that episode, by the way, if you haven't already. We published it just last week. Today, we're looking at how the UK PR industry is ready, or not, for the AI revolution. PR agency Magenta Associates worked with the University of Sussex to survey comms and marketing professionals last year about their use of AI. It gives a decent snapshot of where the industry is now. Joining me to discuss the findings is Jo Sutherland, Managing Director at Magenta Associates. Hi, Jo. How are you?
Hi, John. I'm good, thank you.
Good.
How are you doing?
Very well, thank you. Very well. And we also have Dr Tanya Kant, Senior Lecturer in Media and Cultural Studies, Digital Media at the University of Sussex and Research Lead on the project. Hi, Tanya. How is sunny Brighton today?
Hi. Yeah, it's okay. Not too sunny today, but it's good, thanks.
Good to hear. Right, well, let's get into it. First of all, I wanted to ask a bit about the background to the research. What kind of questions did you ask? Who were you surveying and when was it? And, well, I guess also why did you carry it out?
Let's start with the why, shall we? Just a bit of context. I'm a writer inside of work and outside of work. And when CheatGPT launched publicly or went public in November 22, my first reaction was, oh God, yeah, what am I going to do in my career? Which may sound a bit dramatic. And to be fair, I can be dramatic at times. But I soon kind of had a word with myself. And as someone who runs a PR and communications firm, I knew that we all had to be ready for when clients started asking us, well, how is that going to impact our work with you? How's that going to impact the industry? So we wanted to get ahead of it. So we commissioned a white paper from pretty much within 24 hours at ChatGPT launch. And we wanted it to be as neutral as possible. So although myself and a few other members of Magenta felt a little bit unnerved about the tech, we wanted to be balanced and see it as an opportunity as much as a challenge. So what we decided to do is look at how it would impact the communications industry. But that was very much based on interviews with those in the know. So we interviewed academics, where we met Tanya, legal representatives, and the general gist back then was the law has not caught up with AI. And through that, we kind of looked at some of the ethical considerations of it. And we also interviewed and surveyed marketeers as well for that first white paper. Anyway, so that launched, it got a lot of traction and attention. And through the success of that, the relationship with University of Sussex, which is local to the Magenta office, and I'm also alumni. Yeah, the relationship with the University of Sussex deepened through our connection with Tanya. And then we decided to do part 2 of the research, which was really to give it more gravitas. And that's probably the time I should hand over to Tanya.
I'm a media and cultural studies researcher, and I'm interested broadly in how algorithms shape everyday life, not only our kind of worldviews, because we know through things like social media algorithms that a lot of our media content that we are exposed to is increasingly shaped by algorithms, but also things like identity and authorial writing and creative practices that have been shaped through things like the emergence of ChatGPT. There's loads of research out there that kind of theorizes about what this technology can do. And there's a lot of research that's speculative, but not so much that's looking at AI use in specific contexts. So this kind of project is really a response to that call from other researchers that we really need more research that looks at how people are using AI tools in specific contexts in everyday life, rather than thinking about those broader speculations. So that's really how I came to be interested in this project. And so we conducted a large-scale survey of over 1,000 content writers and their managers in the PR and communications professions. And I also conducted around 30 interviews, and we're still doing the interviews to kind of really drill down into why people are using these tools, because surveys are good at telling us if they are, but not so good at like the nitty-gritty of why. So yeah, that's really how I came to the research.
Well, thank you. And obvious question, what do you see as the main findings? I sort of asked earlier on if you could come up with your sort of top 3 most interesting findings, and I've had a look at it and there are lots of interesting things in my mind. But it'd be good to hear from both of you about what you think the most salient bits of data are really for our audience.
The top 3 things that came out of the research for me was really that people are using these tools increasingly. We found that over 80% of the survey respondents using them kind of either really frequently or have used them in their work. They're not using them, however, for writing as a general rule. And what I mean by that is that people are using them for efficiency tools. So they're using them to do things like idea generation, research, synthesizing existing text, structuring text, giving people ideas about what to write. If you're writing something and you've got to write it sort of 3 or 4 times over in different ways, people are using it to rewrite content. They're not really using it to produce new publishable content. And one of the things that they told me, especially in interviews, is that, and this is changing all the time because of the way that the technology is developing, but that really, in terms of generating text, ChatGPT and its competitors are not great writers, i.e. the actual identity of the author, the brand identity and the way in which ChatGPT writes is not very convincing. So people told me things like it sounds very robotic, or at the other end, it was too flowery. So there was some interesting findings for me around like, these are marketed as generative text tools, but actually people are not using them to generate text. They're using them for research, synthesizing, writing, editing. So that was one of the things.
Yeah, I mean, the kind of top line of the research is 80% of the content writers that we surveyed are using these tools, but only 20% of their managers know about it. So there seems to be this disconnect really between use and that kind of disclosure element. But what I found interesting from the research is that in itself, the idea of disclosure, to me, carries connotations of kind of confession or suggesting that they need help doing their job. And perhaps there is an element of shame and guilt in using this tech and these tools, especially given that, you know, their managers didn't know about it. And I think we need to kind of get rid of that idea that there is something shameful about using this tech. I think we have to kind of be cognizant that it's here, it's changing the way we're communicating, the way that we live, play, work. And I think it should be commended to use it, to experiment, to get creative and explore the options, but obviously in a effective and ethical way. But from this particular research, what was kind of screaming out to me is that people were a bit lost in a sea of confusion. That is still the case because there's tools coming out every day and there's not much guidance. So yeah, lack of transparency was key to the research. But linked to that, and this is, I think, is the kind of, for me anyway, what stood out more than anything is people are crying out for training. I think it was 5% of people said they had any training or guidance on how to use this tech effectively. And even the companies that do have guidance, it's very vague, like use it selectively, quote, end quote. You know, what does that mean? So, yeah, I think from the main takeaways from my point of view is people are using it, but they're using it not knowing how to, and they need some training to do that effectively and some governance in terms of, what an ethical AI strategy would look like for their role and their organization with that communication and transparency that goes with it.
That's really interesting, I think, and concerning, really. I think the fact that everyone's aware of it, almost everyone is probably dabbling a little bit with it or using it to some extent, but there really isn't quite a sense of being guided by their PR companies or presumably in-house teams on it. I wonder if it's one of those things that maybe falls between a few different stools, if you know what I mean. Is it the sort of training division of the agencies? Is it the AI expert? Is it the sort of, I don't know, the sort of tech comm specialists that are guiding? Do you think maybe there could be something in that sort of the industry hasn't quite worked out whose role it is to train up?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think some of the bigger agencies out there are hiring their head of AIs and head of digital innovation, which is brilliant. But for the smaller agencies out there, or indeed the smaller in-house teams, they may not have access to those minds. And from my point of view, I've been in communications for 20 years at Magenta, for 10 of them, and I'm a writer, so I'm definitely not a techie. However, From doing this research with the University of Sussex, I've really developed an interest in AI and ethics specifically. And so in my spare time, I'm studying this topic. I've done courses at London School of Economics. I've been to lectures at University of Oxford, and I've become more cognizant of all the different moving parts that are involved in this. And you're right, John, it's under no particular remit. It's not under HR's remit because they've never dealt with this tech before. I think it's down to everyone to kind of really kind of get on board with it and to kind of become literate in this. Yeah, I imagine there is a disconnect between the gravitas of the change that is required and the people on the ground who are trying to make it happen.
Yeah, well, it sounds like it, but no, fascinating. What other kind of findings, sort of stood out for you from the research?
One of the things that really stood out for me was thinking about what kind of training. So we could talk about the fact that prompt training is, very much high on the agenda nowadays, with different trainers out there offering prompt training, i.e., you've got to ask these tools the right questions in order to get the right answers. That was reflected in our survey and interview. What I would say is that prompt training is only a part of thinking about being truly AI literate. So one of the things to bear in mind is that these tools are really quite different from other tools that are on the market right now that people use for, say, research. So it's really different from Google in terms of, you're looking for a tool that's going to give you a question about something. And so a lot of our interview respondents especially told us that ChatGPT or whatever tool they were using, it is just a tool at the end of the day. And so that was an interesting way of thinking about it. And it is just a tool, right? It's no different from Google in the sense that we've now got another thing that's going to help us do our jobs better. What I would say is that how it works from Google is really different. These systems work by essentially parroting back information that it's learned from a training data set. And it's comes with the hazard of being able to hallucinate, i.e. make things up. So this kind of tension between respondents knowing that it was a tool but not knowing quite how it works is interesting to me, because in order to use it effectively, it isn't just about giving it the right prompts, it is about understanding a little bit about how these technologies work and what they can and cannot do.
No, that's very interesting, isn't it?
I think there's also a slight contradiction. So our research shows that 80% of professionals are using it, but I think that the fact is, from my conversations in the industry since we've run that research, is that actually it might be being used ad hoc as and when on a bit of a trial and error basis, but PR agencies, communications agencies, and in-house teams, AI is being underutilized. I think we generally kind of associate generative AI with content creation, but there are a myriad ways that you can use the tools that are out there to support your day in, day out activity. And as of yet, I'm not aware of agencies really driving that. Sure, the ones that have hired heads of AI, I'm sure are. An agency recently is looking to hire a managing consultant to kind of review their systems to bring AI in. And I think they've given them a 3 to 4 month timeline. I mean, in 3 to 4 months' time, everything they're looking at will probably be out of date. So yeah, our research shows that there's a willingness, I think, to experiment, but it's not mirrored in the employers' strategies or planning yet. And I kind of understand why, but that does need to change because AI is here and it's not going anywhere, and communications will evolve as a result of it.
Were there any sort of areas in particular where AI is being underutilized, would you say?
Probably in terms of analysis, it's not being utilized yet. These tools are very new. So, for example, you can use the likes of Google Notebook LM. Its context window is absolutely huge. You can stick a load of reports in it that you maybe don't have time to read, and it can do some amazing things with it. It can digest what it's been fed. It can pull out various things that you can use. You can turn it into an audio podcast with a click of a button. You can create a study guide from the information that is there. When you have these conversations in the industry, yeah, people kind of react going, what? They don't know about it yet. And to be fair, I am generalizing here, but I think all the fuss is about content creation. It's not necessarily about extraction and thinking about that analysis piece. even since we first had this conversation, John, about having, us being on this podcast, things have changed so much. There are so many different tools and tech out there. Another thing is like the data analysis part. AI is good for the data thing, right? Everything is data, even words. With every word, there's a token. You put tokens in, you get tokens out. That's literally how it works. But obviously it's getting more and more sophisticated and clever. But in terms of data analysis, that's it's always been one of AI's strong points. It can take on vast amounts of data, swathes of data that the human brain couldn't even make sense of. And it can turn it into something that is based in truth, based on the data you feed it, that can support all sorts of efforts. So I could probably talk about this all day, but essentially my thinking is across the areas of AI use in agency, I think currently the default is to use it for content creation.
Interesting. Yeah. And I mean, what other barriers do you think there are in terms of PR getting to grips with AI, and what came out from the study in relation to that?
There's so many tools out there. They're coming out every day. And it's constantly hitting the headlines, AI. You've got DeepSeek last week. You've got Alibaba's new reasoning model that came out about a few days after it. Like the pace of change and the pace of the tools that are hitting the market, it's just, you can't keep up with it. And I think there's a bit of AI fatigue about there. There's so much you could be using and could do, but it's getting your head around that. I heard a stat the other day, or a fun fact the other day, that if AI development stopped today, as in kaput, no more, it would take us 10 years to grapple with the tech that's already out there and incorporate them into our daily lives and into our workflows. And the thing is, AI development is not stopping. So how can we possibly keep up? So I think AI fatigue and not knowing where to start is kind of one of the key barriers. But also, we're human beings, and change is sometimes tough. Change, like the most basic change, is tough, but then you've got to think about reimagining your life, your work life, how you do business, how you engage with people, even how you charge fees. It's a lot of change in one go, especially when we don't have all the answers yet, because it's constantly evolving. So I think the fear of the unknown, the fear of kind of how the role will evolve without that kind of backdrop of certainty, the tsunami of tools that are hitting the market on a constant basis. And, at the moment, the biggest challenge is probably just a lack of understanding about AI's strengths and its limitations. I don't think PR and communications people can fully grasp yet what it can do and what it can't do. And that in itself can lead to over-reliance, which is bad for quality, or it can lead to complete avoidance, which is bad for innovation. Yeah. So those are my takes on some of the barriers.
Wow. No, thank you. Very important stuff. And Tanya, what do you see as the potential barriers?
Because I'm a cultural studies researcher at heart, I'm interested in some of the long-term effects on what this means for communication and society more generally, but also, kind of more specifically for PR in terms of business. One of the things that we don't really understand yet is how in the long term these models are going to make money, i.e. they are producing lots of revenue at the moment, OpenAI, for example, but not necessarily profit. So they're still not generating profit, even though they're kind of worth billions on the stock markets at the moment. So understanding the long-term effects for small businesses and agencies and publishers in terms of advertising models, I think is going to be really interesting to keep an eye on, i.e. how is advertising going to be integrated into these systems? It seems unlikely that it's not going to be integrated at some point. There's some interesting research that's come out recently that shows that people tend to trust these systems more when a link is provided by the ChatGPT or the tool that's giving you the output. So what I mean by that is that by adding source links to outputs on, say, Perplexity or one of these models, publishers are not necessarily going to get the click-through that they want, because people see the link and think, oh, this is a trustworthy source, I'm not going to link on it. I'm not going to click through. So there's some interesting ways in which we trust these systems. That means that publishers might be losing out even more. And we know that this is a struggling industry already in terms of revenue generation. So thinking about the wider kind of cultural and economic implications of how these tools are going to make money and when advertising is going to be introduced and how it's going to be introduced is interesting to me. I'm also interested in really what Joe was saying about this idea of AI fatigue. How can we be possibly fatigued already? It's only, we're only talking about, a year and a bit into these tools coming out. But the reality is that we are getting this sense of fatigue through, because it's not the technology itself, really. It's the use of the term. We're seeing AI banded around so much. There's quite a lot of research out there that is challenging this idea that everything that we talk about being AI is actually artificial intelligence. AGI, as it's called, artificial general intelligence tools, are accepted by quite a number of computational scientists not to be intelligent in the way that we might think they are, that think of the term intelligence. So by companies and everyone else kind of jumping on the AI word bandwagon, I think we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves a little bit. So demystifying this tech is something that I'm interested in. It's something that I think is a barrier that all workers need to think about, everyone that's using it, because we know that in public life, we tend to think of computers as scientific and that they can't lie or that they can't do any wrong. But from things like the post office scandal, we know that that's not true. So having a healthy skepticism towards what these tools can do and how you should trust them. I'm not saying don't use them, but I am certainly saying understand what a hallucination is, always fact check your work. Those kind of things are going to help us get over that AI fatigue.
Yeah, a good tip is to ask whatever platform you might be using, if you're using it, at the end of that process, just say to it, "Are you lying to me?" And it will be honest, a bit like Dobby in Harry Potter. Sorry, master. Start hitting his head on the desk. But yeah, you'll get some truth out of that.
Joe, it would be good to know how your agency is using AI right now.
We secured the government's AI upskilling fund towards the end of 24, which meant we had 50% covered of all our AI training that we do in the business. So we took advantage of that, and we've been rolling out training across the whole team. So my take on it was, until we were trained on it, on how to use it effectively, cognizant of the models that are out there, and had thought about the ethical considerations, we wouldn't just start using it. We would be like, well, we would, but for our own marketing efforts. So we kind of put ourselves forward as guinea pig. But now we've done the training. We're now having conversations with our clients to check that they're happy with our approach, basically, because we think transparency is quite key. I know historically PR agencies wouldn't say to a client, "Oh, we're using Google for this," but because there is such an enchantment of language, and because the fact that these tools can produce copy, we wanted to kind of be clear about what is the human role in what we're doing and what's AI's role. And so for us, we have an AI policy which is evolving. Let's face it, it evolves probably every month because of new stuff on the market and everything else. But the general gist is make sure there's transparency with everything that we're doing. Communicating with clients and with journalists, if that is the case. But we don't use it for writing. We use AI for supporting with editing, for example. It's kind of like a much better spell check, put it that way. So we're using it with support for editing, and we're experimenting at the moment with video, with podcasts, and with image, although we do have a bank of associates that we use for that who are much, much, much better. So at the moment, it's just experimenting. And we're also going to start looking at how we can use it to better demonstrate ROI, which is a question we get asked. I've been asked for the last 20 years, and it's still, we don't have all the answers for that one. But with some of the innovations in AI, we may be able to give a bit more weight to that question when it comes up. So yeah, we're in the process of rolling that out at the moment. Certain clients have given us their permission to kind of experiment. So we do a lot of bid writing, for example. That's one of the activities that is really, it works quite well for these platforms. You can, we use the paid for version, so there's no kind of security problems with it. But you can create a custom GPT, for example, for a particular client, input in all their information, data, documents, style guides, editorial guides, whatever it might be. And then you can use that custom GPT to write bids in a way that will promulgate the kind of key messages they want to get out there, but that are relevant to the bidding question. And by doing that, we've managed to save our clients loads of money because it's not taken as much time as it used to. And also, I'd say the quality, it still needs loads of human oversight, but the quality, I think it kind of helps things like cutting repetition, flow, and everything else. So look, we're at the beginning of this journey. I'm not going to pretend that we're experts in it, but we have really kind of committed to the training piece, to doing the policy framework around it. So there's fair use, communicating with our clients and with our industry friends and journalists that we work with. And yeah, the next step is just to keep going, really, keep experimenting. These tools are changing all the time, but the bare basics of how to use them won't. So that is our current approach anyway.
Looking at the wider picture, what kind of upcoming regulations do you think the comms industry needs to be aware of when it comes to AI?
Well, the law hasn't fully caught up with AI yet, but governance around it is improving. I think we should start with the EU AI Act. This obviously only impacts companies in the EU, to an extent, it can also impact companies that are putting AI outputs into the market that end up in the EU. They could still be liable. So the EU AI Act has been criticised for being quite strict. I, as an AI ethicist, think it's commendable because obviously the pace of development, if ethics isn't embedded into that, then who knows what could what could happen. However, there's others quite skeptical, saying that strict approach is hindering innovation and progress. It is what it is, but the main thing to be aware of from the UK's perspective is it's likely that the UK will have a similar law, or at the very least we'll do more on AI governance. We've got our AI Safety Institute here in the UK. We've got 10 times the budget in America, which probably won't surprise a lot of you. But yeah, so we are taking it seriously, and it's likely we'll take a more flexible approach to the law on this. But the one thing that will be mirrored from the EU to the UK, if my conversations with the process are right in saying, will be the idea of AI literacy. So employers, there will be a legal obligation, or at the very least best practice, to ensure that everybody in their business, every employee, is AI literate. Now, that doesn't mean just one course and bing bang bosh, you're done. It means ensuring people can understand the tools that they're using and can engage with them, being mindful of all the things that EU law does not allow. So the EU Act doesn't allow prohibited AI, which is anything that could cause harm. I mean, it's a bit loose, but anything that could cause harm, misinformation, disinformation, etc. High risk AI is workplace AI. So anything that might track bodies, movement, etc., or link to personal data would be considered high risk. And then there's the other two forms of AI, which we don't really need to have to worry about. So from February 25, prohibited AI comes into that law. And this summer, high risk AI comes into that law. So yes, it's EU, but I think we still need to be mindful of that in terms of what we're doing. So one of the advice from that is to really kind of keep track of the AI you're using or experimenting with, create a bit of an inventory, because that's probably the thing that we're going to have to provide as and when this gets going. On the other side of the pond, you've got the US and the copyright ruling that was last week or so. So basically the ruling there is that any AI generated content cannot be copyrighted. So anything that hasn't been created by humans, it cannot be copyrighted. And obviously this could have an impact on PR and communications. If, for example, you're using AI to do videos, music, or whatever it might be, it can't be copyrighted. So yeah, the law's changing on this all the time, but there are a few things to be mindful of. I think opting for best practice and putting ethics at the heart of everything should keep you safe from any potential penalty moving forward.
Yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it? I think that fact that if you come up with a creative idea and it's using AI, I know the question of sort of creative ideas being sort of recycled is one that comes up again and again in the comms industry, but this is really another dimension to it, isn't it? That you might come up with a kind of an image that is particularly useful for a certain campaign, and then you find out that your rival is using the same one in some instances. Who knows?
What's happening currently with that is some trade magazines tend to use the same kind of stock images, like they're all using the same kind of ones when there's a new business deal. So I guess it's same but different, right, in terms of how it could be used moving forward. But I think there'll be more value in human-made content, in the written word, in the images. I think perhaps the flip side of all of this is that maybe artists will get their heyday because people will value it more.
Certainly hope so. Great. So, I mean, the final question I wanted to ask you both, and in a way, Joe, you've sort of you answered a little bit there, but it'd be good to get one or two practical tips for comms professionals to sort of get ahead in AI at this stage. What would you say?
So I would say that you should be mindful of the tasks that you're using it for and taking notes to yourself about if it's actually more efficient to use the AI tool than to not use it, i.e. if you're spending 2 hours editing a piece of content that is written for you, is it really actually saving you time? So yeah, being mindful of this kind of illusion of efficiency. Also, always fact checking. As I've said before, these systems have a propensity to hallucinate, taking it for granted that the information it's going to be telling you is true. Checking the privacy and training data settings for whatever tool you're using. Quite a lot of these tools come with an option where you can say, I do not want the text that I'm inputting to be used in future training data sets. So, just to protect your IP and to make sure that you're as compliant as possible with sensitive information, but not just sensitive information, your own IP as well. I mean, that's something that we're not really I think, as an industry, talking about enough. A lot of the talk around ethics is around individual use, but actually thinking about collective ethics, especially for small to medium businesses, is quite important. So it isn't just about protecting like other people's information. It is about protecting your own ideas. I mean, I really like the call as well. Maybe it doesn't sound very practical, but I think it is a practical tip in that really championing like human authorial expertise is going to be really important in the next few years. So some forecasts are saying that 90% of online content is going to be created by generative AI by the end of this year. So 90% of the internet is going to be AI generated content.
Wow.
That's just huge, right? And we know that this systems are unenvironmentally friendly, and even DeepSeek, the new one, where it's supposed to be, a tenth of the energy, it's being demythed already that it is actually quite energy heavy in terms of using it for production. So not going with this assumption that churning out more content is going to be the solution. Get back to your human networking, really strengthen your authorial tone of voice, and think about the fact that these systems are not that capable of generating new thought. They don't think for themselves. And so, we still have very valuable human workers and writers and ideas creators and networkers in your professions. So take advantage of them and don't get swept up in the tide and think, I've got to produce more and more content. It's going to be the quality, not the quantity, that's really going to matter.
Great. Thank you. And Jo, final thoughts?
Just to say, if anyone's feeling a bit overwhelmed out there, you're not alone. I think everyone's feeling overwhelmed by AI and its potential and its challenges. I'm part of an AI collective, and even we can't keep on top of everything. So don't feel overwhelmed by it. Just kind of go with it. And I think my advice, we're all in the creative industry, and I don't know about you, but I got in this industry to do the people bit, meet up with people, have those kind of genuine connections, and also think creatively and make things happen. So I think my advice would be to just start experimenting with it, especially MDs of PR agencies, maybe just, set challenges for your teams to kind of do your own marketing efforts, just to kind of basically unleash your childlike, curiosity, because those that do remain curious and keep kind of experimenting are going to be the ones that find the value from this process. And if you're in an in-house team, same thing. I think as long as you're open and honest about how you're using these systems, experiment, but I guess like Tanya said, don't be churning out loads of content because you think that's the answer. I think it's going to be more about human relationships, doing what we do best, which is forging those genuine connections. And also, let's face it, the way we consume news is changing. The way we consume content is changing. It's going to continue changing. The way we search for brands is changing. SEO, it's not dying as such, but it's definitely going to have to evolve. And what is it going to go evolving into? At Magenta, we've got a digital marketing arm, and we're actively looking into this at the moment. So I think it's just keeping ahead of what's happening out there. There's 1,000,001 headlines on AI, but for those that are relevant to communications, I think we really must stay abreast of it if we're going to prosper.
Great, thank you. Well, I feel it's a subject we could talk about for much longer, but unfortunately we are out of time for this episode. Big thanks to Jo and to Tanya for joining us and sharing your thoughts and insights. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So if you've enjoyed today's episode, we'd love it if you could leave a review, please, wherever you access PRWeek's Beyond the Noise podcast. Until next time, thanks for listening and goodbye.